The sack was rough against her skin, stifling and hot. Clara June couldn't see, but she could smell sweat, whiskey, and the gun oil of the man who dragged her across the wooden floor. Laughter echoed somewhere above her head, hoarse and toothless. The sack jostled with each step, her ribs bumping against boots and broken floorboards. When the dragging stopped, she was dropped like a sack of potatoes. The sudden stillness was louder than the noise. "All right, gents," the auctioneer's voice croaked, theatrical and soulless. "Last one tonight. Hell of a find, young, strong, and silent as a church mouse." A murmur passed through the crowd, along with a few lewd comments and the clang of metal cups. Clara bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. "Let's start at $20. $20? Was that all she was worth? The bidding started slow. A few offers rolled in between jokes, one man shouting something obscene just to get a laugh. Then a deeper voice, quiet but clear, cut through the haze. 50. The crowd stilled. Clara heard footsteps. He was close now, close enough that she could smell dust, saddle leather, and something cleaner beneath. Soap. Not the kind a saloon girl used, but Lion River water. The auctioneer cleared his throat, unnerved. "No others? All right, sold. Take her." A pair of strong hands lifted the sack. She tensed, expecting another shove or slap. Instead, the hands were firm but careful, like she was made of something breakable. The air outside was cool. Her heart pounded as the sack was cut open with a quick flick of a knife. For a second, Clara couldn't see. The stars above seemed impossibly far, like she'd been buried and dug up. The man didn't say anything, just offered a battered canteen and turned toward his horse. She stared at his back, confused. Tall, broad-shouldered. A wide-brimmed hat covered most of his face, and his duster was threadbare, the hem frayed like smoke. "Who are you?" she rasped. He didn't answer, just looked over his shoulder and said, "You coming or you want to stay with them?" She glanced behind her. The crowd had already lost interest. Men wandered back into the tavern, laughing, one of them kicking at the empty sack like it was trash. The auctioneer lit a cigar and walked off into the shadows. No one even looked at her. Clara followed. They rode in silence for a long time. The moon cast the prairie in silver, the grass rustling with ghosts. She kept glancing sideways, studying the man who had bought her. He didn't try to talk, didn't touch her. He just rode, eyes on the horizon like he was chasing something only he could see. When they made camp, she didn't speak. He gave her a blanket and a slab of dried meat, then went a good 20 feet off and sat with his back to her, staring into the fire. The silence was deafening. "Why'd you buy me?" she asked eventually, voice trembling despite herself. He didn't look at her. Wasn't buying. Was rescuing. She laughed, short and bitter. "Is that what you call it? You could have just stopped it. You didn't have to say that. I said it so they'd stop bidding. That's all." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. No offer of comfort. No false promises. Just silence and firelight. She lay down eventually, too exhausted to argue. But she didn't sleep. When morning came, he was already packed. She stood stiffly, her muscles sore, her pride raw. "I need a name," she said. He nodded. "Gideon Callahan." "Clara June." He tipped his hat in acknowledgement, and that was that. They rode west. The land changed as they moved. Scrub gave way to dry hills, the sky endless. Occasionally they passed abandoned shacks, burned-out wagons, bones bleaching in the sun. He didn't speak unless necessary. She asked questions, but he answered only what was needed, nothing more. She tried to run on the fourth night. Slipped away while he was asleep, quiet as a breath. By dawn she was lost. The desert was not kind. The heat came in waves, shimmering. Her boots filled with sand. Her lips cracked. When she finally collapsed near a dry arroyo, she thought maybe this was the better end. But he found her. When she woke, it was to the shade of a makeshift lean-to, the bitter taste of water on her tongue, and his voice, quiet, steady, saying, "You run again without a map, you'll die." "I wasn't going back," she mumbled, weak. "Didn't say you were." He handed her a strip of jerky. She took it reluctantly. "Why'd you come after me?" Gideon looked at her, then really looked. His eyes were gray, not the stormy kind, but the flat, steady color of river stones. "You're not a sack of flour. You're a person. And people ain't meant to be sold like cattle." She didn't know what to say to that. That night, she woke to the sound of digging. She crept toward the noise, barefoot and cautious. Gideon stood near a small patch of turned dirt, a box in his hands. He knelt and placed it in the hole, covering it quickly, reverently. Clara watched from the shadows, her breath shallow. He lingered for a long time, hat held to his chest. Then he muttered something she couldn't hear and returned to camp. She didn't ask the next morning. And he didn't explain. The days became rhythm. He taught her how to saddle properly, how to read trail signs, how to shoot. Not that he offered exactly, she just watched, mimicked. He never praised her, but when she hit a bottle at 30 feet, he nodded once. That was enough. Where are we going? She asked one day. Somewhere no one knows your name, he said. Then after a pause, unless you want them to. You think I should change it? I think you should decide who you are. It was a strange answer, but it stayed with her. That evening they stopped at a stream. Gideon stepped away to let her bathe, handing her a bar of lye soap without a word. Clara scrubbed hard, until her skin felt raw, until the girl who'd been sold in a sack seemed like something she could wash off. When she returned, her hair damp and tangled, he handed her a clean shirt, one of his, oversized but soft. She hesitated. Why were you helping me? He shrugged. Someone should have helped my wife. No one did. There was a finality in his tone that made her stomach twist. She didn't ask more. That night, she stared at the stars and tried to remember the last time someone had spoken to her without wanting something. They stopped at an old miner's outpost 2 days later. Gideon traded for supplies. Clara watched the townsfolk. A boy stared at her with wide eyes. A woman narrowed hers in suspicion. A dog followed her for an hour, wagging. When she returned to the horse, Gideon handed her a knife. For your belt, he said. Why? Because the world's sharp. You should be too. The words made her grin despite herself. But that night something shifted. They camped near an old riverbed. The water was low, the mud thick. Gideon was quieter than usual. She noticed how his shoulders stayed tense, how he kept checking the distance behind them. We being followed? She asked. His hand went to the rifle. Maybe. She didn't sleep. When dawn broke, a rider appeared on the far ridge. Then another. Clara stood behind Gideon as he raised his rifle slowly. But the riders turned, disappearing into the brush. Scouts, he muttered. They'll be back. He turned to Clara. We'll head north. Rougher terrain. She didn't argue. As they broke camp, Clara looked back at the horizon. The desert was still. But something was coming. And she wasn't the same girl who'd been dragged across that saloon floor. Not anymore. She turned to Gideon, voice steady. You think I could shoot a man if I had to? He met her eyes. I think you already have. Just haven't yet. The answer wasn't comforting. But it was true. She rode beside him now, not behind. The wind carried dust, secrets, and the weight of what was coming. Clara June didn't know where the trail led. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to follow it. By the time they reached the Red Canyon country, Clara could hit a rabbit at 20 yards. She still flinched when the shot rang out, but her hands no longer trembled afterward. Gideon said little during their days in the saddle, yet every silence between them grew less strained, less barbed. There was space now, room for thought, for breath. Not trust, not yet, but a quiet understanding. Like two wild animals learning not to bite. She didn't ask where they were headed anymore. She just watched the terrain shift, from sand and scrub to sunburnt rock and bone-white cliffs. She marked the route in her mind, paying attention to water sources, shade, the slope of the land. She started carving notches into the stock of her rifle, one for each skill she learned. One for each day she survived. The days were hot. The nights were colder than she expected, and the wind sometimes howled through the canyon walls like a warning. Gideon always set camp on high ground. Clara would gather kindling while he watched the horizon. They moved like people expecting trouble, because they were. Clara didn't talk about the sack anymore, or the voices in that saloon, or the laughter that still echoed in her dreams. But the past had claws. It surfaced when she least expected it, in the way she flinched at sudden movement, the way she instinctively tracked every exit from every building. Even in the moments of calm, her body stayed tense, coiled like a snake that never forgot the first boot that tried to crush it. Still, something in her was growing, solidifying. She caught herself laughing once. It surprised her so much she stopped mid-chuckle and looked around as if someone might accuse her of it. Gideon noticed, said nothing. Just handed her a piece of jerky and looked back to the fire. Then came the cabin. It looked like nothing, just a lean-to against the rocks, barely standing, roof half caved in. They stopped because Gideon said there might be water. Clara approached cautiously, rifle raised. The place was empty but not forgotten. A boot print in the dust. A faded scarf hanging on a nail. Then a sound. A branch snapping behind them. Gideon turned fast. His revolver was out before Clara even spotted the man. Ragged hat, broken nose, beard like wire. The stranger had a rifle slung across his back and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You Callahan?" he asked. Gideon didn't answer. "Thought so. Word was you were riding with a girl. Tall one. Wild eyes." Clara stepped forward before she realized she had. "What do you want?" The man gave her a long look. "There's a price on you, sweetheart. Your daddy wants you back." "My father's dead," she said. Funny he didn't seem to know that. Gideon moved between them. "You got 5 seconds to disappear." The bounty hunter didn't flinch. "They're paying good. Real good. Even if I bring her in dead." The world went silent. Wind, birds, everything stopped. Then Gideon fired. The man spun, shot through the shoulder, rifle clattering to the rocks. He screamed and ran, stumbling down the canyon trail, leaving a trail of blood like a broken promise. Clara stood frozen, heart hammering, fists clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. Gideon holstered his gun, calm as ever. "You didn't kill him," she said. "No need. He'll bleed fear faster than blood." They left before sunset, moving quickly. Clara rode with one hand on her rifle the rest of the day. That night, Gideon built the fire higher than usual. Clara stared into the flames, the bounty hunter's words rattling in her skull. "You think he'll be back?" Gideon shook his head. "Not alone. He'll talk. Someone'll come." Clara didn't sleep. She sat with her back to the canyon wall, eyes on the darkness beyond the firelight. In the quiet, her memories rose. Her father hadn't died. He'd sold her. Drunk and desperate, he'd handed her off to settle a gambling debt. She'd screamed, clawed, begged. He hadn't looked back. The man who took her had locked her in a shed, called her collateral. When the law came, they looked the other way. She'd bitten one deputy, bloodied his wrist. They'd left her cuffed to a fence post in the rain. Clara hadn't cried since. When dawn painted the sky in shades of fire, she stood and said, "Teach me to shoot better." Gideon didn't argue. They practiced on bottles lined up on rocks. He showed her how to breathe, how to wait for the stillness between heartbeats. She hit every one by noon. Afterward, he handed her a small silver locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman with dark eyes and a half-smile. "Your wife." He nodded. "What happened?" "Sherman's men came through. Burned everything. Took what they wanted." He looked past her, voice flat. "I found what was left. Buried it. I'm sorry." He tucked the locket back into his coat. "Ain't your sorrow to carry." But she carried it anyway. 2 days later, they reached a trading post nestled in a narrow gorge. It wasn't much, just a dry goods shack and a few tents, but it meant people. And people meant risk. Clara stayed outside while Gideon went in. She watched the traders. Watched the horses. Watched the woman with a scar down her cheek who kept looking over her shoulder. When Gideon came out, his jaw was tight. "They know," he said. "About me? About us." She didn't ask how. Just mounted up. They rode until sunset, then veered off the main trail and into the hills. The terrain turned mean, full of loose rock and steep climbs. It slowed them, but it also made them harder to follow. By the second night, Clara's nerves were shredded. Every coyote howl sounded like a war cry. Every snapping twig was a gun being cocked. When the attack came, it was fast. 3 men. 1 from behind, 2 from the ridge. Gunfire exploded. Gideon took cover behind a boulder, returning fire with mechanical precision. Clara dropped low, heart racing, remembering the breath between beats. She aimed, squeezed the trigger. The man on the ridge jerked back, his rifle tumbling down the slope. She'd shot him. She didn't know where. Didn't care. Another shot cracked. Gideon cursed, hit in the leg. Clara scrambled to his side. The third man charged, yelling, revolver raised. She fired again. He crumpled mid-run, legs folding like a broken chair. Then it was over. Smoke and silence. Clara knelt beside Gideon, eyes wide. His face was pale, jaw tight with pain. "Can you walk?" "Not fast," he grunted. "Then don't." She hoisted him up, arm over her shoulders. He was heavier than he looked, but she didn't stop. She dragged him to the horses, tied his leg tight with a torn sleeve, and rode hard into the darkness. They stopped in a cave, shielded by brush. Clara built a fire, boiled water, cleaned the wound with shaking hands. Gideon said nothing, face clenched against the pain. When she finally tied the bandage, he leaned back and exhaled. "Not bad," he said. "I watched you do it," she replied. A long pause. "You shot 2 men." She looked down at her hands. They were bloody, trembling. "I had to." "You didn't hesitate." "I was scared." "That's not the same as weak." She met his gaze. Something passed between them then, not soft, not tender, but real. A recognition. Clara sat back, arms around her knees. You still think I'm just a sack they dragged into town? No, he said. I think you're something they should have been afraid of. She didn't smile. But the firelight caught a flicker in her eyes. Not joy. Not peace. But power. Later, as Gideon slept fitfully, Clara stayed awake. The stars looked different now, less distant, less cold. She knew the bounty wasn't gone. Others would come. But the fear had changed shape. It wasn't a shackle anymore. It was a weapon. She looked at the rifle resting beside her. If they came again, she'd be ready. The wound festered by the third day. Gideon tried to hide it, gritting his teeth and muttering he was fine, but the fever gave him away. Sweat slicked his brow, and by nightfall he was too weak to stand. Clara took charge without hesitation, stripping the bandage and boiling water in a tin cup, grinding dried herbs he'd taught her to recognize. He drifted in and out of consciousness while she worked, whispering names she didn't recognize, stories from a life he never offered to tell. She stayed awake all night, dabbing his forehead, murmuring calm things she didn't believe. She wasn't a healer, not truly, but she remembered every step Gideon had ever shown her. How to sterilize a blade. How to lance the infection. When the shaking started, she cut him open with steady hands. His blood was hot and thick, and for one awful moment she thought she'd killed him. But he groaned low in his throat, then fell into a deep, quiet sleep. Clara didn't move for hours. She sat beside him, face blank, hands stained, staring into the low fire like it could explain everything. Morning crept into the cave with the cautious grace of a thief. The world outside still spun, uncaring. Clara stood, stretched her aching back, and began to repack their supplies. Her eyes scanned the horizon from the cave mouth, rifle always within arm's reach. There was no time for mourning or waiting. He'd live, or he wouldn't. And if he didn't, she would go on. Not because she wanted to, but because she knew now that she could. Gideon woke 2 days later. His voice was gravel and ash. You stayed. I owed you, she said without looking at him. Now we're square. He chuckled, but it turned into a cough. That's so. She turned to him then, arms crossed. You get better or you die. Either way, I'm not carrying your heavy ass out of here. Fair. Despite his condition, he smiled. Clara didn't return it, but she sat beside him, her silence a truce. By the end of the week he could stand. He leaned heavy on a branch she'd shaped into a crutch, but he was mobile. Clara packed light, trimmed fat from the supplies, and cut a straighter path north through the hills. Every movement was intentional. No more wandering. She had a destination now, even if she hadn't named it yet. The next town was a mining settlement, small, dirty, too poor to ask questions. They arrived just after sundown, the air thick with coal smoke and suspicion. Clara guided the horse. Gideon walked beside her, limping and silent. A saloon flickered with lantern light. Men stumbled outside, laughing too loudly, boots crunching on broken glass. They booked a room above the general store. One bed. No questions. Clara bolted the door behind them and set the rifle by the window. You sure this place is safe? Gideon asked, easing down onto the bed. No, she said. But I'm sure I can shoot faster than they can climb stairs. He laughed, and this time it didn't turn into a cough. The next morning, Clara asked for ink and paper. She sat at the edge of the bed and wrote a letter, not to anyone she'd send it to, but to the girl she used to be. She wrote about the sack, about the desert, about killing a man and not regretting it. She folded it and tucked it into the lining of her saddlebag. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something like clarity. In town, the whispers started quickly. 2 travelers. Woman rides like a soldier, man walks like he's dying. Word spread. And with word came danger. They left that night. No fire, no noise. Clara kept to the shadowed trails, one hand on her rifle, the other steady on the reins. By the time they crossed into the high desert, Gideon had healed enough to ride again. He said little, but his eyes lingered longer on Clara, watching her like he saw something new. Not a rescued girl. Not a burden. A partner. Clara noticed it too. He no longer led without checking if she followed. He asked her opinion on the trail. Let her scout ahead. The shift was subtle, but to her, it felt monumental. They made camp at the base of a butte, the sky so clear it hurt to look at. Clara stared up, listening to the wind sigh through the rocks. I think they'll come again, she said. They will, Gideon replied. More than before. He nodded. News spreads. Bounties grow. She turned to him. So what do? We fight. Clara nodded. The fire crackled. "But not blind," he continued. "We need allies. We need somewhere to hole up. Somewhere to finish this." "Where?" Gideon stared into the dark. "There's a place up in Wyoming. Old fort. Abandoned. Used to be a station during the war. No one remembers it now." She listened closely. "It's defensible. Good water. Caves nearby. And it's high, makes seeing trouble easy. Then we go." They left at dawn. The journey was rough. Narrow passes, wind that screamed through valleys, rivers swollen with mountain snow. But Clara didn't falter. She rode hard, eyes sharp, always scanning. They encountered a lone rider 5 days out. He didn't look like a bounty hunter, too old, too sun-worn, but Clara didn't take chances. She stepped in front of him, rifle raised. "State your business." He raised both hands. "Just a trapper." "Swear it." She held his gaze. "Then keep riding." He did. That night, Gideon carved a mark into the side of his rifle. She watched him. "What's that for?" "Men I don't have to kill," he said. "They count too." It struck her then, the weight of restraint. The choice to spare, not just survive. At the fort, they found what Gideon promised. Crumbling stone walls, rusted gates, a stream nearby, and caves that could hide a dozen people. They cleaned it out, worked in silence. Repaired what they could. Made it livable. Clara fashioned a lookout post in the southern tower. Gideon rigged traps, deadfalls, and alarms. They trained every day. Shooting, signaling, fallback routes. Clara grew leaner, faster, more deliberate. She no longer waited for his approval. She simply moved, acted, decided. One night, she climbed to the tower and stared out into the vast, silent world. She spoke without looking down. "Do you still think of your wife?" "Yes." "Do you think she'd hate what you've become?" "No," he said softly. "But she'd hate what I lost trying to find justice." Clara understood. A week later the scouts came. They didn't get close. But Clara spotted the glint of a scope in the distance. "They're gathering," she said. Gideon didn't flinch. "Then let them come." The wind picked up. The sky darkened. In the distance, storm clouds rolled across the plains like an army marching. Clara sat by the fire that night, cleaning her rifle, checking the sights, laying out ammunition. Gideon joined her, laying out maps, strategizing, preparing for siege. As they worked, he glanced at her. "You afraid?" "No," she said. "I'm angry." And it was true. Anger, sharp and cold, had replaced her fear. Anger at the men who bought and sold her, at the law that never came, at the father who turned away. But beneath it, deeper still, something else pulsed. Resolve. Gideon reached into his coat and handed her the locket. "She'd want you to have it," he said. Clara took it with both hands, feeling the weight of a life lost and a life earned. "I'll keep it safe," she said. "You'll do more than that," he replied. "You'll outlive every bastard who ever tried to break you." The storm began in the distance. Thunder rolled like cannon fire. Clara stood, locket in her pocket, rifle in her hands. They were coming. And this time she'd be ready. The first shot cracked through the morning mist like a whip. Clara didn't flinch. She was already crouched low behind the outer barricade, rifle steadied, eyes locked on the ridge where the glint of a sniper's scope had shimmered the day before. She waited, breath held, as another shot followed, closer, louder, biting into the stone inches from her face. "They're testing our defenses," Gideon said behind her, crouched in the inner wall with his pistol drawn and bandolier strapped across his chest. His voice was calm, but she could hear the gravel of anticipation in it. "They'll find we've been busy," Clara replied, her voice tighter, coiled like a spring. Dust swirled in the open yard behind them. The old fort, once bones and ruin, had become a trap layered in patience and planning. Tripwires waited in tall grass. Spike pits were covered with broken boards and baited with glints of metal to draw eyes. A storm of steel and sweat had turned the ancient stone into a final line of defiance. A third shot rang out. Clara fired back this time. No hesitation. The crack of her rifle echoed, then silence. A bird flew off from the ridge. No movement followed. She watched the line. Waited. Gideon touched her shoulder. "They'll come at night." "I know," she said, not looking back. They spent the day reinforcing the kill zones, tight corridors built from stacked crates and debris, funnels to channel men into narrow sight lines. Gideon double-checked his claymores. Clara rewound wire through the old gate posts. Their movements were wordless now, practiced, born from shared urgency and unspoken understanding. Just before dusk, Clara climbed the southern tower and sat beneath the broken window frame. In the distance, shadows gathered. Shapes. Men. She counted at least 15, but she knew there would be more behind them. Bounty hunters. Hired guns. Opportunists with no names, just greed. She sat in the fading light, polishing her rifle barrel with a rag until it gleamed. The wind carried the smell of sage and dust and something darker, blood in the air, or maybe just the memory of it. Behind her, Gideon climbed the stairs, slower than usual. His legs still stiff but not failing him. He lowered himself beside her and watched the horizon. For a long time neither of them spoke. "When I first found you," he said finally, "I didn't think you'd live through the night." "I didn't either. But you did. I wasn't ready to die. Not like that." She looked at him. His face had aged in the week since the fever, more lines now but something steadier too. A quiet steel in his eyes. "I used to think I had nothing left to protect," he said. "Then you came along." Clara didn't respond right away. She didn't know how to. But she reached into her pocket and held the locket he'd given her, thumb brushing the edge. "Then let's make it mean something," she whispered. The first wave hit just past midnight. Silent feet. Black shapes moving through the fog. Clara saw the first one go down, snared by the wire, throat cut by its own momentum. A second tripped a mine and vanished in flame. The others scattered, but by then Clara and Gideon had opened fire. The air exploded with sound. Muzzle flashes. Screams. Barked orders. The stone walls of the fort lit up in bursts as men fell. Clara fired in quick, precise bursts, aiming not to wound but to end. She counted each shot, reloaded fast, shifted positions. Below, Gideon moved like a ghost. One moment at the front barricade, then gone, reappearing at the west flank. His revolver barked 6 times, 6 bodies dropped. He knelt behind a wagon wheel, reloading in the dark with mechanical ease. They kept coming. 10, maybe 12 more, better organized, rushing the narrow breach in the wall. But Clara had planned for that. She triggered the oil trap. Flames erupted across the opening. Screams followed, high-pitched, raw. The attackers scattered, some throwing down weapons, others vanishing into the dark. But 5 made it through. They surged into the yard. Clara vaulted down from the tower, rifle slung, knife in hand. She landed hard, shoulder rolled, came up slicing. One man reached for her and lost his hand at the wrist. Another lunged with a machete. Gideon shot him from 10 paces. The last 3 turned toward Gideon. Clara yelled, but too late. One tackled him. They tumbled into the dirt, fists and fury. Clara sprinted forward, ducking a wild swing, slashing open a gut. She leapt over the body, raised her knife, but Gideon had already handled it. Blood ran from his brow, but the 2 men beside him didn't move anymore. Silence fell. For a second, only the crackle of the dying fire and Clara's ragged breath filled the yard. Then a voice shouted from beyond the walls. "Clara Holt." She froze. The voice was deep, familiar. Mocking. "You think we didn't know? You think you'd run forever?" Her name rang in her ears. Not the name she'd taken. The one she'd buried. She stepped forward, slow. "Who's out there?" she called. Gideon limped beside her. His face was pale beneath the blood, jaw clenched. "You know me," the voice answered. "Your father sold you, but I bought you fair. You were mine before that boy thought he could play the hero." Clara's grip on the rifle tightened. "I remember your eyes," the man continued. "How you begged. How you screamed. Now you wear a gun and think it makes you strong." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She raised her rifle and fired once, straight into the dark. The voice stopped. Then chaos. A final wave charged the wall, dozens this time. The last of them. Clara and Gideon fell back to the inner yard, laid traps, fired shot after shot. Bodies fell, piled, burned. Clara took a bullet to the shoulder, kept firing. Gideon collapsed, one man with the butt of his rifle, another with a blade hidden in his boot. It was brutal. Close. Desperate. When the sun finally rose, they stood in the middle of a yard littered with death. Clara leaned against the wall, bleeding, breathing hard, eyes closed. Gideon sat near her, arm pressed to his ribs, chest rising and falling. No more gunfire. No more voices. Just the soft hush of morning wind. They didn't speak for a long time. Then Clara whispered, "It's done." Gideon looked at her. "For now." She turned to him. "Then we build again." He nodded. In the days that followed, they buried the bodies. No markers. No names. Clara kept the locket around her neck. The wound in her shoulder ached, but the pain didn't matter. It was proof. She'd survived. A week later, a rider approached from the west. Young. Alone. Hands raised. Clara and Gideon met him at the gate. "I heard there was a place," the boy said. where people who've lost everything can start again. Clara looked at Gideon, then back to the boy. There is, she said. She opened the gate. And in the wild lands of the West, where justice had long since faded into dust, something new began. Not revenge, not escape, but something deeper. A reckoning. And a home.